Hi, Mike Skeen here for Racers 360. Thank you for sending in your video. Really happy to see that you guys are seeing our stuff down in Australia and taking advantage of their services. Hopefully we can help you out here. Looks like these cars are a blast in the track as well. So I think it's pretty awesome. I'd love to see it in person. It looks like a lot of fun, but let's dive right in. I did your laps throughout the video just to get a feel for how you were using it more consistently rather than just looking at one lap. So I think in general it looks really good. Obviously this looks like your best lap. The main things I would focus on, well, we'll go through it as we get corner by corner, but in some areas I noticed that on the higher speed brake zones, you're not as quick to go to really high peak pedal pressure, it looks like. And so I think you're losing some of the advantage of the maximum braking right at the initial part of the brake zone. You want to make sure that your highest pedal pressure is really, really early so that, while the vehicle has a lot of momentum, you're not getting into ABS or lockup because the car, it's harder to stop, obviously, from high speed. So make sure your pedal pressure is really, really steep initially and then bleeding off towards the corner. But let's do it. Here in turn 1 and 2 looks really nice. I think you're pretty consistently faster here. It looks like you typically gain a little bit of time through there. Sometimes here through 3, I noticed that you struggle. Obviously you struggle with the back end a little bit on this one. I think you were a little later turning in, so that tiny bit extra steering input created that oversteer. A lot of times you're really your upshift. You even there was a little bit early, but some laps you're doing it even 100 more RPM or less. And so on this initial track out, while it's still up a little bit of time by doing that short shift. So I go ahead and let it run a little bit longer. And then this brake zone here is one of the ones where it looks like your initial pedal pressure is not quite as steep. I don't know if you look at your data much or not, but if when you're looking at your brake trace, you want to see that high peak early, really quick, and then maybe a little sustained and then start to kind of trail off. Looks to me like you're a little bit slower on that initial pedal pressure, and then it kind of flatlines and maybe builds a little and then starts to fall or something like that. But you're not taking advantage of this really early portion here where you can be really hard on the pedal pressure and get a lot of slowing done, really quickly early in the brake zone where you're not going to get that ABS engagement or lockup. I'm not sure if you have ABS or not. But yeah, you want to make sure while the car has a lot of speed that you're taking advantage of a lot of pedal pressure, and that'll help you stay on the brakes or, till a little later, stay on the power longer going into the brake zone. So I think actually if we were overlaying, say, yours and mine or whatever, I think yours would start a little bit early and then go like that, something like that. And so your release and the entry speed portion might not be too different, but I think you can go a little bit later on the brakes if you're using that higher peak pressure early on. So that should help a little bit. And then this corner and the next right-hander that we get to, looks like sometimes you're a little bit early to slow the car as well, because you're on throttle multiple times. And so this lap was better here, but several times I can hear you going on off throttle like 3 times maybe before you're really committing to throttle. And so that tells me that you're slowing down, below the potential maximum early in the corner, and then you start tipping into throttle to get back to what you feel is the right speed for the corner. But then you have to let off because you're a little too early, and you're getting to the throttle really before the apex, and that's keeping you. You're basically just giving up the entry. You're sacrificing and getting back off the throttle so you stay online on the exit, which is good, but you're giving up potential entry speed. And so if you feel like you're back to throttle early, and multiple times especially, then that should be a kind of a trigger to yourself that you have a little bit more entry speed potential. And so I would say a little bit later braking so that you're arriving at the turn in and the corner entry with the brake release, as you're adding steering input. So you don't want that transition, off the brake to happen before you're really rolling the car into the corner. You're just giving up a little bit. And here looks pretty good. I don't really have any issues. Sometimes in there you were just a oversteer on the entry and then had to kind of over straighten or over correct. I think part of that was being just fractionally late on the turn in. And so that caused you to turn. So I think just slightly earlier on the turn in will help you get to that apex without creating that extra steering input that, obviously losing a little bit by being a little wide from the correction. Up here, this really fast corner, I feel like you're giving up a little bit as well, kind of over braking on or lifting too much. It's a little bit hard to tell, if you're on the brakes or not. But to me, it looks like the revs come down too early in the corner, and then you start building back up because at the apex, starting to get all the lights on your dash are going counter, and then right there at the apex, you're already getting lights back on. So that tells me that you're slowing down below, what your minimum speed in the corner is actually before the apex, before the tightest part of the corner. So you're giving up a little bit on entry. I think you should be able to keep those rev lights on the whole, at least one set. And then you're also not tracking out, a ton on the exit. So I think you're pinching it down, trying to stay a little bit more mid-track rather than letting the car out to the left a little bit. And so if we open that radius some, that'll also help. And this is another brake zone where I think your initial pedal pressure could be a little bit higher and therefore wait to be on the brake just a little bit later. So you can be on the power through the fast bend a little bit longer, brake zone a little bit, and then you should be turning in here, with a little bit more brake on. If you've braked a little bit later initially, that release is going to happen as you start your steering, and that'll help keep from getting as much under. So I think you're coming off the brake pedal a little early, and by taking that weight off the nose, you're losing that front end grip. And if you're a little later on the brake, arriving at the corner with just a little bit of pressure that'll help the front end work a little bit better. And then up here, I feel like there's just a few more mile an hour on entry, but overall looks pretty good. So, I think the line and all of there is really good. I would just try to maintain that full throttle a little bit longer. It seems to me like there in a couple of places where you're arriving at kind of the high portion of the rev range right before the brake zone, you kind of ease out of the throttle in anticipation of the brake zone. And just make sure that, you're carrying it, staying in the revs, not just bleeding off of them because you hear that audible indication, the sound telling you that it's time to shift or time to ease up. We want to keep carrying the power that extra car length or two all the way to the brake zone just to make sure that we're taking advantage of any speed that we can get. And then just a couple other comments. I know this is a one lap analysis, but since you posted the whole race video and I watched most of it, I was just going to mention that early in the race, it looked like you lost a little bit to your competitor here in the other FRS just because you were a little maybe too generous or too careful with traffic that I assume is another class. It looks like the Volkswagens are probably a different class. And you were letting them by, which is very nice and is a good thing to do, not race guys in different classes. But I think you're giving up a little too much of your own performance just to be nice. And so it's obviously a balance, but if you're close to your own competitor, sometimes you have to be a little bit more selfish. And I think you lost a little bit there. And I think also when you were ahead of your team or your class car, the other FRS here, and then you got up behind the Volkswagens, you weren't aggressive enough to really push it. When you were close, within 2 or 3 car lengths of them, you'd kind of back up your brake zones a little bit. You wouldn't roll the entry speed quite as much. And you weren't just letting the car get as close to them as was maybe available. And so then that's what led you, made you susceptible to the repass. Keep that stuff in mind. Obviously, it's easy to armchair quarterback from, the sidelines and 2020 hindsight and all that. I would say being a little bit more selfish maybe in the beginning parts of the race until things start to even out a little bit. Obviously, you don't need to block guys in another class, but you don't have to be too generous either sometimes. So overall, it looks really good. Hopefully you find some of that helpful, and let us know if we can help you again.